Welcome to another development update for Reygn. So my focus for this update was on improving and adding several things in order to get closer to a playable prototype of the game. And the first thing that I worked on adding was ranged weapons. Alongside this work, I revamped the weapon system by splitting weapons into containers and definitions, where the container is just an item prefab, and the definition defines things like what animation to play when attacking, and what an attack should actually do. And what I ended up with was when the player left clicks when they're holding a ranged weapon, a projectile gets spawned. This projectile then moves forward at a certain speed, and every update ticket uses a raycast to check if it's going to hit anything, and if it does, then it damages it. One problem that did come up, however, was because the projectile is moving quite fast sometimes, it has the potential to bypass the target, and this is because the physics raycast on a projectile only checks 1 unit ahead per update tick. So what I did to fix this was to also check if the projectile hit anything between its current position and its previous position. And this is the result that I've got. Since I'm using definitions to implement this behavior, I can also now very quickly and easily add new ranged weapons whenever I want with different kinds of projectiles. Next up, I switched to using a character controller for player movement, which seems to have improved collision detection a lot. And I also added in double jumps. I really feel that they make player movement a lot more dynamic. However, currently the player controls and animations, especially attacks, they still feel a bit stiff, and so that's something I'm going to keep working on, as I think it's a really big part of the player experience. Fast forward to November, which is when I picked up the A Star Pathfinding Project by Aaron Granberg from the Asset Store. This is because I wasn't a big fan of my current pathfinding solution, which just used Unity's default packages, and I really needed something else. Aaron's project is a great asset because it provides me with exactly what I need for agent pathfinding. This is because the trickiest part of the pathfinding that I need in Reygn is that agents need to be able to distinguish between a true obstacle that will always be there, like a rock, and a temporary obstacle which it can break, like a wall. One solution for this, and which is the one that I ended up using, is to use a grid of nodes, where you apply high penalties to the nodes occupied by those temporary obstacles, which forces each agent to find an easier path, or if there is none, to target whatever is blocking its path. And what this also does, which is quite nice, is that it gives the added flexibility of allowing enemies to take easier paths, for example, by letting them target weaker structures. The way that you can do this is to simply give those weaker structures a lower penalty. The A Star Pathfinding project has allowed me to very easily implement that kind of pathfinding, as it's really straightforward to start using and comes with great documentation. With improved pathfinding added to the game, the next thing that I wanted to focus on was effects. What effects do is temporarily alter attributes of entities, like freezing them in place or damaging them over time. And the first effect that I worked on was one that slows things down. Effects use the same container and definition pattern that I've been using all this time for all of my entities in the game, which again makes them very versatile and lets me attach them to any kind of action. For example, whenever an enemy makes contact with a tar pit, or when they're hit by a particular arrow, then that effect can come into play. And this is what the slowing down effect looks like in the game. Then the last thing that I worked on was the addition of units, the first of which was an archer. This did require a slight rework of the placement class, as I didn't want archers snapped against the grid of cells like structures do, and I also wanted to be able to place them on structures. As you can see, unit placement will still need some work, and it's something that I'm going to come back to in the future, but for now this works just fine. The archers themselves are a very basic unit. They don't move around at all, and they simply just target enemies when they're in a certain range. They use the same projectile entities to damage their targets, so they're pretty straightforward to implement. And finally, I did some UI rework, like turning the health text into rectangles. Another change that I made to the UI is when you're in build mode, it now shows you the structure that you can place and what you've currently got selected at the bottom of the screen. I know that it doesn't look that great right now and it's pretty basic, but I'm probably going to have a session in the future where I'm going to focus purely on just UI work. But right now, it's not the most important thing. And that's everything I've been working on since last time. So for my next development cycle, my focus is going to be on the following things. I would like enemies to be able to intelligently target structures, units, or the player themselves. I would like to get a proper level into the game. I'm going to add some basic menu screens. I'd like to implement a proper wave system to work alongside the existing spawn system. I'm going to start on a basic integration with Steamworks. I'd really like to work on some more content for the game, so more structures, units, enemies, and new models for all of those things. I'm going to introduce some sort of resource or currency that the player is going to have to use during gameplay, with which you can buy structures, units, upgrades, etc., which you can also earn from enemies. And lastly, just some general cleanup and performance improvements. As the game becomes more playable, I'm starting to think about getting people to playtest it, so that I can start to gather feedback and also involve people in the development process itself. If you are interested in playtesting, let me know in the comments. I've also created a Twitter account with the handle LM Studios, and you should give that a follow if you're interested in seeing shorter but hopefully more regular updates on Reygn between these videos. Thanks for watching, and if you've got any thoughts about the development of the game or the game itself, let me know below.